It begins, as so many stories do, with a complaint, an American voice demanding answers from India. This time, the question was not about oil, not about defense, not even about software or services. It was about something as simple as corn. America asked, why won't India buy corn from us? The question came not from a farmer, not from an economist, but from Howard Lutnick, the United States Commerce Secretary and one of Donald Trump's most loyal lieutenants. In an interview given to an American outlet, Lutnick lashed out at India, accusing New Delhi of blocking American farm exports. His words carried not just frustration, but insult. He claimed the trade relationship was one-sided, that India sold to America but refused to open its markets, that tariffs blocked American farmers, that India, with its 1.4 billion people, was deliberately refusing to buy even a single bushel of American corn. One must ask, why would such a basic agricultural product trigger such an outburst? Why would one of Trump's closest men call out India over something so small? And most importantly, is there even truth in this complaint? The answers reveal not only the reality of India's self-reliance, but also the deep vulnerabilities and insecurities hidden beneath America's actions. To understand this conflict, one must start with the obvious question: does India even need American corn? The reality is simple: India does not. In the financial year under review, India produced an estimated 42 million tons of corn. National consumption stood at around 42.7 million tons. The numbers speak for themselves. India is virtually self-sufficient. Imports, when they occur, are marginal. Until 2024, in fact, India was not an importer, but a net exporter. Every year, 2 to 4 million tons of Indian corn were shipped abroad, feeding not just domestic needs but also global markets. Only in 2024 did India import a small quantity, about 1 million tons. And even that was not due to food shortage, but because of something else entirely: ethanol. India has embarked on an ambitious program known as E20, aimed at blending ethanol into petrol to create cleaner fuel. Ethanol requires crops like corn and sugarcane. This sudden new demand pushed consumption up, creating a temporary gap. So India imported. But where did the imports come from? Not from the United States. Instead, India turned to Myanmar and Ukraine. Why? Because their corn is non-genetically modified. This is the crux of the issue. Nearly all corn produced in the United States is genetically modified, altered in laboratories to resist pests, withstand drought, or increase yield. While this technology is celebrated in America, India has drawn a clear red line. GM crops remain banned in the country, with the sole exception of cotton, and cotton is not even a food crop. India's government has stood firm, despite heavy lobbying from the poultry and feed industries, who argue that genetically modified corn would lower costs. But the concern is larger: food security, biosafety, and the unknown long-term impact of genetically modified food on 1.4 billion people. Thus, even if India were to increase corn imports tomorrow, American corn would not qualify. The ban makes it impossible. So the real clash is not about demand. It is about principle. Washington wants markets open to its farmers. India wants to protect its people and its soil. And in this gap lies a fundamental disagreement that no trade negotiation can easily resolve. Despite these differences, both sides are still talking. Reports suggest that negotiators are set to meet again. Brendan Lynch, America's trade representative, and Rajesh Agarwal, India's chief negotiator. But the reality remains: unless Washington accepts India's position on GM crops, there will always be limits. Even if policymakers in Delhi relax restrictions, Indian consumers may reject American corn on principle. It raises a deeper question: why is the United States so desperate to sell corn in the first place? The answer lies not in India, but in America's own farm economy. For years, Donald Trump has told his people that the United States is being taken advantage of, that other nations are using America's open markets while refusing to reciprocate. He brought this message even to the United Nations, where he bragged about his economy and demanded recognition, even a Nobel Peace Prize. But behind the speeches lies a crisis. Trump's trade war with China has backfired catastrophically. And at the heart of this disaster is America's most celebrated strength: agriculture. The truth is that America produces far more crops than it can consume. Some estimates suggest 40% of U.S. harvests must be exported abroad. Entire farming communities depend on exports to survive. For soybeans alone, 1 in every 4 rows grown in America is destined for foreign buyers. And the largest buyer of all? China. For decades, Chinese demand created fortunes for American farmers. China purchased 61% of the world's soybean supply. But when Trump launched tariffs against Beijing, he overlooked one fact. China had options. When the U.S. raised barriers, China turned to Brazil, to Argentina, to Africa. Billions were invested into new supply chains, new farms, new trade routes. What once flowed to American silos now sailed across the Pacific from South America. In 2017, American farmers sold $14 billion worth of soybeans to China. In 2018, that number collapsed to zero. For the first time in 2 decades, the Chinese market vanished overnight. Brazil stepped in, expanding its exports. China even invited 183 Brazilian coffee exporters, once banned from the U.S., into its own booming coffee market. Now the fastest growing in the world. For Washington, it was humiliation. For Beijing, it was strategy. This shift was not limited to soybeans. As China redirected its purchases, the ripple spread to corn, coffee, and other commodities. The Belt and Road Initiative accelerated infrastructure in Africa and South America, ensuring long-term supply lines that bypass the United States altogether. While China built, America sanctioned. While China invested, America tariffed. And as the gap widened, farmers in the American Midwest sank deeper into debt. The Trump administration had to issue bailouts, $16 billion in 2019 alone, to keep farms afloat. Ironically, many of those farmers were Trump's own voters, who had believed in his promise to make America great again. Instead, they became collateral damage in a war they never asked for. But the damage did not stop with agriculture. American giants like John Deere and Caterpillar reported billions in projected losses due to higher input costs and falling demand. Even the pride of Silicon Valley, NVIDIA, was caught in the crossfire. After Trump briefly allowed chip exports to China, Beijing responded by banning purchases from U.S. companies, costing NVIDIA billions in lost revenue. The contradiction was clear. While Trump promised to revive manufacturing and protect farmers, his policies achieved the opposite, crushing exports, inflating costs, and eroding confidence. For ordinary Americans, this translated into skyrocketing prices. Housing up by more than 50%, fuel higher by 55%, coffee nearly doubled, eggs rising by 170%. Consumer confidence fell to historic lows, with surveys showing only 39% approval for Trump, the lowest in modern memory for a president so early in office. The reality is that America's desperation to sell corn is not about India at all. It is about the failure of its trade war with China, the collapse of its export markets, and the vulnerabilities of an overproducing agricultural system. India is simply a convenient target, a market large enough to dream about, but sovereign enough to say no. The United States, rich in land and resources, has trapped itself in cycles of overproduction and overdependence on foreign buyers. It wages tariff wars without understanding consequences. It alienates partners and strengthens rivals. So the next time a foreign leader demands why 1.4 billion Indians will not buy their corn, the answer is simple. Because they don't need it. Because their nation has chosen safety, sovereignty, and self-reliance over dependency. As America wrestles with its own crises, India must remember, its greatest strength lies not in bending to outside pressure, but in believing in its own capacity.